if you're looking to get promoted, have the conversation early. Don't wait until your annual review and then be like, by the way, I'd like a title bump, because chances are the decisions have been made. So I always say, you almost can't have that conversation too early in terms of saying, hey, I know I'm being hired as a marketing manager, or I know I've been here for a year. What I ultimately want is to be a VP. That's what I one day want. So I know that there's probably lots of steps and certainly I want to master this before I move into the next thing. But I would love to be having conversations with you, whether quarterly or whatever that looks like. There's a big difference between expecting to be promoted within 6 months of starting a job and saying, hey, here's my long-term vision. I would love, I'm willing to invest in my development. Point me in the right direction.
Welcome to the How to Get a Job podcast. In this episode, we are going to be talking about how to break the glass ceiling, right? How to go from a manager to a director to vice president to a C-level executive. And to talk about this important topic, I have an amazing guest. I have Katy McFee. She is the founder of Insights to Action. She's a former corporate executive, and now she works and helps women break into more executive leadership roles. So Katy, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here.
Katy, I'm super excited. Like I was mentioning to you before we kind of hit record, and we were trying to do it on Riverside now that we moved here. I'm super excited to talk about topics like this, but more from a point of view from someone who's been there, done that, right? Like the best way to reach any goal is to learn from someone who's done it. So the fact that you've been in that situation, you've been the manager trying to get to the director level, the director trying to get to the vice president level. And now that you're helping other women do the same, I think that's amazing. I think that's kind of why I'm super excited to have this conversation with you, to try to get more women to listen to this message and in hopes that some of them that are struggling can reach out and work with you. But Katy, what, ultimately got you to, leave your corporate job to do this full time?
Yeah. So I never thought I would leave my corporate job. I thought a corporate career was what I would do forever. And I really did struggle on my transition from, manager to director to VP. And at that time, I couldn't find a lot of resources to help me. My CEO was trying to mentor me, and I was saying, I really think I need more mentorship, or I need someone else. And, you mentioned learning from people who have been there. We were thinking, okay, well, who would be a great female mentor for me, who could really understand my unique challenges as a woman? And I could not find anyone. I was scratching my head. And I spent 5.5 years as a director trying to get promoted to VP. And I did not know what I did not know. And then finally, I did become a VP, and then I became an EVP, and I was really successful in those roles. I enjoyed it. But I noticed as I became more senior, one, I was starting to wonder, is this ultimately what I want? I was feeling burnt out, right, at that point in my career. And as soon as I started to entertain the idea of creating my own business and helping other people through this challenge that had been really difficult for me, it was I couldn't unsee it, right? So once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And I thought, I think this is something I really need to do. And it's interesting because when I first decided to launch my business, I thought I was going to be doing a wider variety of stuff. I was okay, I'm going to help early stage founders, and I'm going to help teams to work together, executive teams to work together more effectively. And I'm going to coach, men and women. But as soon as I actually got into it and started coaching women and started writing, sharing publicly, it was hit me pretty quickly that I really just want to focus on helping women to make this transition, being the mentor that I did not have, right? And helping to ultimately narrow, eventually close, hopefully in my lifetime it closes, but the gender gap we see in senior leadership. So I'm so driven by my mission that I fully pivoted, stopped doing everything else, and now I've gone all in on this.
I love that you went all in on this, because I truly feel like you can help like women in that space more than anything else, right? And like, and it's part of my journey as I grew as a coach as well, of understanding that yes, like I could be a great career coach for everyone. I could be a good career coach for everyone, but I can't be a great career coach for everyone, right? And I think that's why it's so powerful to have a niche. And also, if you're listening to this, to work with a coach that has a niche, because if that coach or that person you want to work with or you want to learn for, it helps everyone, then in a sense, they're going to do you a disservice because you're going to be missing out on the things that only someone that's walked that path or has a specific need. And I give an example of this. Like I work with international STEM students, right? And most career coaches don't go into legal and immigration. That's not their wheelhouse, right? But because I work with this particular group that needs legal and immigration advice, I have an immigration expert that comes to speak to our group every so often, that elevates the services that we provide, that no other career coach needs to do that, right? And then it goes back to what you're sharing. It's you as a female in the corporate world, dealing with the challenges allows you to have a very unique perspective. You've walked that path, or you walked in those heels, right? That I would not be able to do. And sure, there's some overlapping things that also male deal with when they're trying to get promoted. There is. Let's say the 80% is the same, but that 20% could make all the difference. And I that's why I think it's so important that regardless of the goal that you're trying to accomplish, whether you are a female listening to this, you're looking to get promoted, maybe you're stuck at that manager or director level and you feel like you're stuck. I think that finding the right solution or help is that. And so I want to obviously acknowledge that, but also spend the rest of the conversation asking you about what are some of those things, because I don't know, right? Like I don't know what I don't know because I didn't walk in those shoes myself. So what do you think are some of those particular early challenges that the women are facing when they're trying to get towards manager to director stage?
Yeah. So I would say one of the big ones, and men sometimes face this as well, but I've noticed that as women, we really get caught in it. One is moving from being a doer and focusing tactically on, taking action and crossing things off your list and producing, to being more strategic, which might mean carving out thinking time. It might mean slowing down to speed up. So that's a big one I see. Another one I see with women is we often struggle to advocate for ourselves because of conditioning that we've had, right? We don't just decide like, oh, I don't want to advocate for myself. Typically, we've learned this growing up, like, don't do this or you're going to face a penalty. And so we don't, right? We work hard with our head down. We're like, they will notice. And that's a mistake, right? That there's a way to do it such that you can advocate for yourself and share your wins, but not face that penalty. So that's another one. I would say another one is really just like the belief. So if you have not had mentors or you've seen like representation of people that look like you, whatever that means, right? It's for anyone who would be considered diverse, whether that's like ethnically, religiously, or gender at those leadership levels. You can hold a lot of limiting beliefs around, do I belong here? So that's a big one as well. It's like getting over that mental hurdle of, you know, believing you belong there so you can start showing up as that leader.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned, it kind of like it reminds me a lot of my conversations with my wife. It's like I don't know that there's any harder working person than my wife. Like like obviously super biased, but like even throughout her whole life, she's like always been a really hardworking individual. She took school extremely seriously, always had better GPA than I did, always, really involved. And I think for me, like my superpower has always been networking and building relationships. And so it's interesting how I've always been someone that, not necessarily like, I don't think I am, I would say cocky. I hope I'm not, I don't come off that way because it's definitely not how I want to. But I also am always been very confident, like, like trying to never blur the line, but I've always been very confident. And not that my wife is not, she's silently confident, which is awesome, right? But when it came to her in corporate America, she was like, if I just work really hard, I would be acknowledged. And I think that's something that I see, I noticed, and I'm generalizing here, ladies and gentlemen. Again, this is not 100%, not everyone fits in every bucket. I noticed that like women, minorities, particularly Asians, are I'm gonna put my head down, I'm gonna work, and I'm just gonna hope that my boss acknowledges me, and that's gonna lead to me to get to the promotions or earn the income that I deserve, right? Or that I believe that I deserve. And I used to always tell my wife, like, I think, like, I'm like, babe, like, you need to get involved, like, ERG groups or like student organization. You need to start building relationships because, like, not not every boss you're gonna have is gonna be the best one in the world, and some of them are better. Like, they're very good, maybe technically at the job, but maybe are not the best at like speaking for you. And sometimes you have those bosses who are the best advocates in the world, and sometimes you don't. And but you can't let that be the reason why you were not getting the promotions and stuff like that. And I remember for the first couple of years, I think she would acknowledge this too. She was just head down, let me work, right? And when she started like networking and getting involved in like ERG groups and things like that, I think that's when people started seeing like, oh, like Jessica knows, right? And so I think that's super interesting. And I guess I wanted to see how often do you see that? Did you see that being one of the main things that's like, the clients that come to you before and then after? Is that one of those changes? And what are some other things or correlations that you found that people that before they start kind of working with you or even after that, if they change those things, they start seeing results?
Yeah. Well, you said something really important where you said that your wife is silently confident. And that's actually true for a lot of women. So previously, we've always thought that there's this like huge confidence gap between men and women. And there often is when women are younger. But data shows that it actually closes, right? Where women are equally confident. And there's also been a Harvard Business Review study that shows that women are as confident as men, but they don't portray that confidence. So they're silently confident. So inside they're confident, but they're not demonstrating that necessarily. So that is one thing that we do focus on, not just feeling confident, but how to portray that confidence. What does that look like? Right? Because, studies show that confidence is as important as competence when it comes to career advancement. So you're not wrong there at all. Like being confident is important, but it's not just about feeling confident. It's also about showing that to the world. So that's a big one. And the other one that I focus on a fair bit is what I call the perception problem. So I came up with this idea because I realized when I look back on my career, and a lot of the women around me as well, by the way, I felt like I was ready, but my leadership didn't see it. And I'm like, why was that? I was somehow contributing to the perception that I was not ready for that next step. And that comes down to like communication style, you know, ensuring that you're sharing strategic insights, that you are showcasing good judgment, like really sort of specific stuff that we don't always think about. We just think like, "Oh, I'm just going to get results." And I'm like, "No, no, no. Slow down, create that visual model for your idea. I know you think it's a waste of time. That's going to actually help your perception as a more senior person or as a strategic leader." So those are the big two. It's the portraying confidence and the perception problem that when I work with women, tend to see a huge shift, right? And I've worked with women where, we'll do a session and right after, like that day or the next day, they'll come out of a meeting and someone will say like, "Great job in that meeting. You're adding a lot of value." Or, "Wow, I love that framework. Can you teach that to the other VPs?" Like it is instant. It's really quick. And it's just a matter of understanding those things and being like, "Okay, I'm willing to like put the time into doing this."
So I'm probably going to be very vulnerable here. I have a lot of strong women in my company. So we have about 25 people. A lot of our leadership team is women. And as a male, I think I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm actually going to share a lot of them here. And I would love to hear how my team could have handled it better, maybe conversations wise. Because I'm here to say I'm willing to take about 51+% of the fault here. So just over here, don't come over here and kill me. So there's an example, right, of who is now our marketing manager. Her name is Mariana. Of where before, a lot of them have grown up with me, like in a sense, like they've been working with us for like 2 to 3 years. It's so like as our company has grown, they've grown, and now our team has grown, right? And I remember like her coming to me saying something regarding of like, hey, like she feels like I am overseeing her in roles. Like I'm it comes to me like, hey, like Daniel, I feel like there's a lot of roles where you are not even considering me as the company, and you're thinking about, hey, we should hire for this, and I think I would be good for those roles, right? So we'll start with that one, right? So in that scenario, when that happened, I'm like, hey, like Mari, like tell me, explain to me why you think I'm doing that, right? Because I, for sure, and again, generalizing here, at least for me, I didn't oversee her on purpose. Like, I'm not like purposely like, okay, you're a woman, like I am not going to hire you, like, right? Like, I was raised by a single mother, right? Like I love my mentor is the biggest women advocate in the world. Her name is Frances Rios. If you're watching this, right? She has a company called Women Who Lead, right? She like um so I would never do that on purpose, and I think maybe it's because she wasn't outspoken from the beginning. So what could she have done? And also, please coach me up, coach. So don't hesitate to publicly coach me. I'll take it. This is my job. What could we have done in that scenario? Both Mia, Daniel, the manager, and like founder, CEO, and her, the women employ high potential, always amazing. Like you can count on her. Everything will get done. Like if you give her the task, it is done, right?
Yeah. So yeah, you both could have contributed to making this a better situation. So on her side, what I always talk to women about is if you're looking to get promoted, have the conversation early. Don't wait until like your annual review and then be like, by the way, I'd like a title bump because chances are the decisions have been made. So I always say, like, you almost can't have that conversation too early in terms of saying, hey, I know I'm being hired as a marketing manager, or I know I've been here for a year. What I ultimately want is to be a VP. That's what I one day want. So I know that there's probably lots of steps and certainly I want to master this before I move into the next thing, but I would love to be having conversations with you whether like quarterly or whatever that looks like to understand what does that look like for me, right? What can I start to develop in order to be seen as like the no-brainer choice for that next step? So that's something she could do proactively, right? You as a manager, and you're not alone because a lot I see this all the time where and this has even happened with me, and hey, I was a huge proponent of promoting women, right? Where I would sometimes put out, "Hey, we're gonna be doing some promote like, we're looking for a manager or whatever. If you're interested, submit your interest," because we would look internally first. And it would be like all the men, like I'm talking about men still on probation for the job they got hired for, like literally not 3 months in. And the superstar women are not putting themselves forward. So what do? Right. And I think as managers, as leaders, we can also be starting this conversation proactively. So this was something I learned in my career because I had someone in my office in tears because I had not considered her for a role and I had considered someone else. And it really made me think like, but she had never expressed any interest in this. And so I started trying to be a little bit more proactive about, okay, when we would have, whether it was like monthly or quarterly, kind of depends on your business and what makes sense. But having those conversations about like, what is it you ultimately want in your career? How can I help you get there? That might mean I suggest you take a course. That might mean I suggest you work on developing a specific skill or I give you a pet project or something like that, right? Your job is still your current job, but now I know what you're interested in. So I can connect dots with you. I can introduce you to a mentor, that type of thing. So, you know, I think that we expect women, again, we expect women to advocate for themselves when women have often been conditioned for years and years and years not to advocate for themselves. So, one, it's us getting over that, but also our leaders can help us by initiating the conversation. And then we know, one, I'm allowed to talk about this. But two, like it does so much for that relationship and trust and everything else to know that your leader cares about your development and wants to help you. So yeah, those would be kind of like the two sides of the coin.
Yeah. I would, just kind of want to go in, like, from my perspective, right? As coming from someone who manages the company, right? I founded the company, and like they say CEO, CEO, direct, whatever you want to call it, like managing partner. Like I don't feel like I should call myself a CEO until I manage 100 people, but that's just besides my personal insecurities or something. But I would say, like, and I'm saying this to my team if you're watching this, or I'm saying this to any women out there. I think, like, I generally think that most people are good and most people are not, like, they're not like avoiding promoting you because of like I want to like keep women down. Like I think it's more things of like out of sight, out of mind. Like I think that selfishly, like we're as humans, we're all selfish creatures, and we're always 99% of the time thinking about what we need to do, what's our problem, what's our to-do list, and so on. And a lot of times, generally speaking, I think our male counterparts or your male counterparts are more outspoken, so they're more insight. So visibility sometimes plays a bigger role than the ability. And so when those conversations are happening, whoever comes to the mind top, like we're not necessarily like I'm not purposely blocking somebody out. It's just who's the last person that I can think of that can solve that problem, especially with someone like me, and I'm just generalizing someone like the extroverted, big visionary thinking individual that's not so good at the ground details, and it's not like that's why we have director of operations who manages the details and like double checks my spelling because I can't spell. And when I do an improv live like that, I'm going to make mistakes, right? It's like the reality of it. Um, that's where I think, for me, I need to have better processes, create systems, people planning, have an HR manager that's going to say, hey, Daniel, every quarter, let's look at the people, let's analyze the data, let's make decisions based on data, not just an emotion of who's in the top of your mind. But also like things that you mentioned, I would love I would tell you guys to do this, whether if you're listening, like go talk to that your manager, go talk to even your manager's manager, build a relationship, and don't be afraid. Like you mentioned, I would love it if somebody came to me like, "Hey, can I get 30 minutes of your time? I'm willing to share with you my long-term vision. What I want to accomplish in the next 6 months, year, 2 years, 5 years, where I envision myself in the company, and that way I can tell you, like it's like an open book test. Like here's the skills that you have and the skills that you need to get to there, and let's close it together. Like I'm not expecting you, like I'll connect you with somebody to mentor you. Maybe I go like, hey Kathy, can I introduce you to one of my employees? Like I'll pay for it. Like like that's a solution. There's books, there's mentors, there's coaches, there's programs, there's webinar, there's events. And I think that it's a win-win. I genuinely think like if my team is better, my company gets better, it's by default. So I would never want to hold anybody back. And so I am saying this to you as odds are your boss, your manager, the CEO of your company wants you to be successful. So don't be afraid to start that conversation because they're not going to see it as a negative. If anything, they're going to see it as a positive. Now that helps your visibility and it's going to help. I just going to help.
Absolutely. It is a positive, and there's a big difference between expecting to be promoted within 6 months of starting a job and saying, "Here, here's my long-term vision. I would love like, I'm willing to invest in my development. Point me in the right direction," right? And I think we all I don't know, but you like, for me as a leader, I always loved that because like, "Okay, I know where you wanna go now. I can help you get there." And I always appreciated that with people on my team. I mean, the other thing I would say is there seems to be this is something I've noticed anecdotally. I don't have like hard facts on this, but they say, men are promoted on potential, women are promoted on experience. And I observed this to be true, where I will talk to, CEOs and they're like, we'd love our next VP hire to be a woman. We'd love our next C-suite hire to be a woman. We can't find any qualified candidates. Well, you're insisting that the woman already has 3 to 5 years in that role. And we know that the gender gap widens as you go up in a company. And so they're like, by definition, there's going to be far fewer women in that pool of candidates. So take a chance on a first time director, on a first time VP, on a first time C-suite hire, somebody who has the skills and traits that you want. Maybe they don't have the years of experience, but they have the skills and traits that are required to do that job. So don't lower your bar. Just stop relying solely on years of experience and invest in that person. Provide them with a coach or provide them with a mentor or, whatever that can look like. But I think that there's a real missed opportunity there for, women to advance. And so I like talking about this because I'm like, we need to see more of that. And this is part of the reason I'm so passionate about helping women get promoted into those roles because it can be really tough to get that first time director or VP position.
Kathy, just to change, it's still on this topic, but kind of like a different, something you mentioned earlier about like, it's so I'm generalizing again here. Again, everything here is generally because I think there's women who this wouldn't be an issue to, and then there could be men and this could be an issue too, right? If I think about corporate America, right, and I give this example when I'm coaching my college grads about to get their first job, in the beginning of your career, you're following a lot of processes, right? So like I give you an example, like let's say McDonald's, like the most level lower, like you're gonna go in there and within an hour you're gonna be able to make a Big Mac. Like there's a process. You put the burger, you flip it in like say 30 seconds. You put the French fries for 90 seconds. Like there's like you squirt the bottle like this because it perfectly squirts the same amount every single time. That generates a predictable burger. So no matter if you're in Florida or if you're in Canada, like you're gonna get a burger that's gonna taste the same. It's a predictable product, right? So in the beginning of your career, generally speaking, let's say 80, 90% of your role is going to be very process oriented, following the SOP, following the process. But the higher you get, let's say in the beginning is 80, 90% following the process, 90, 10% you're creatively like making critical decisions, right? Varies by industry, varies by a million things. Totally get that if you're listening to this. But the CEO of the company, what percentage of his day is it following a process versus strategically solving a problem? And I would say it's flipped. Maybe there is a 10%. He has Monday leadership meetings, he has one-on-ones, he has to meet with the like let's say that there's still some level of like built-in processes like where he has 30 meetings he has to attend. Maybe he meets with the finance guy, like the CFO, every Tuesday to review the P&L. That's still very process oriented, right? He needs to then make decisions. So it's split. So what I've noticed, right, is that the more of your job is spent on critical thinking, the more responsibility it is, and the more you get paid fairly, right? And I think women, generally speaking, this is where the general part comes in, are very good in seeing, at least from that, like the females that I have in my team, think a lot about it as a checklist, right? They're very doers. So if you think about it, you have the dreamers, you have the doers. Women generally tend to be like my wife too. She's like checklist. Like she has a checklist. It's done. Like I said, I could give it to my wife. I don't even have to think about it. It gets done, right? How much of that transition from when you're going from roles where you're going 80, 75% execution to then strategy, does that become more difficult for women? What maybe that it stops the level of them getting promoted because maybe they're not communicating how they think things strategically?
100%. So I talk about this like in my program too, where when you go from manager to director, I find is where you see that flip. So when you're a manager, you're still, I call it execution versus strategic. When you're an entry level employee, it's all execution primarily, right? Call it 90%. I like that 90%. But it's primarily execution. You're being told what to do, how to do it, and you just need to execute on it. When you're a manager, it's actually pretty similar but you're just telling someone else. Generally speaking, like the goals, the processes, everything else has been handed to you. You're not coming up with it. Generally speaking, you might be making hiring decisions, so there's a little bit more, but your whole job is just helping your team execute. And this is where people get stuck because when you go to move into a director level, suddenly people are expecting you to spend more time being strategic and people don't know how to do that. And especially if, and you mentioned generalizing as women, often as women, I think we actually we derive a lot of our worth from what we are getting done, what we are contributing. And so women that I've worked with have struggled a lot with just letting go of that. Like delegating, for example, is a big one where, the women I talk to will say a couple things. One, well, if I pass it off, what they might not do as good of a job as I'm gonna do, or but this is like kind of like a crappy job. Like I don't want to delegate that. And I'm like, no, no, delegate that because one, you're making the assumption that someone else also is not going to enjoy doing that, which may not be true. We are all different humans, right? And two, like, you're going to give your team an opportunity to elevate themselves, right? So that is a piece where, often as women, one, they struggle to let go of it, but two, like, no one has taught them. They've never thought about the idea that, oh, now I need to make this switch. No one actually tells you that when you start your career. Like, don't worry, you're going to execute for the first couple jobs, and then you're going to have to move into being strategic. And this is how to do that, right? Like, that just doesn't exist. And so I see both men and women get tripped up here, truthfully. Women a little bit more, again, because I think we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves to, produce and you know, just derive a lot of our self-worth from producing, and so it can be hard to actually say, "You know what? I'm just gonna take 2 hours and, like, think about this strategy." And, think through, "Is it the right thing? Am I how am I presenting it? Am I doing that the right way? How do I wanna, like, share it with John and get his buy-in?" Like, we just don't stop long enough to do that because 'cause we're like, "Well, I've got 700 things on the list. I can't take this time." But it's actually we're doing ourselves a disservice by not doing that.
Yeah, no, and I kind of learned that more on the entrepreneurship side than when I was a manager at PepsiCo because, again, I always felt like I was measuring how successful my day was by how many tasks I checked off my to-do list, versus sometimes one task of critically thinking like, "Oh, I need to record this many videos, or what can I do to record one video that gets more views than if I recorded three because I am finding a better way to broadcast it," right? So like that's the strategy side where if I'm just executionally thinking, record this many videos, and I see that play off. So you're right. I think it affects both, but I see it. That's why I was saying the way that the women's brain, generally speaking, as a checklist works. I see that being a challenge. Before we wrap it up, Kathy, any other roadblocks major that you think that maybe we haven't addressed and that it's important to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots. Like, this is I mean, I essentially created my program around this because, like, there's so many elements that go into making this transition, right, from manager to director to VP. Um, but I guess a big one the other big one would be, and I touched on it maybe really briefly, is your communication style and the framing piece. So, like, how you say the things you say, and being like taking the time to think through, how am I going to communicate this? I'm a big fan of something called the Minto pyramid, which was created by Barbara Minto at McKinsey. And the whole idea is like, start with the conclusion. Start with the conclusion, then your supporting arguments, then all of those details. And often, as humans, as women, but as men too, we flip that. So we start with all of the details. Like, "Oh, yeah, so, we noticed this gap, and so we decided to do this, and and, like, your leader, especially, the higher they go, the more this happens, but they're thinking to themselves, like, what on earth is Daniel talking about? Like, should I be listening to this? Like, where is he going? Right. So that's another shift that people can make. Like, language is important, but also, the way we're framing ideas or, requests or whatever they are, being really intentional about that. Communicating the way people like to hear it. So start with the conclusion, then the supporting arguments, and then the rest. And it's like easier said than done. It actually takes a little bit. I try to work with my clients through this and work through some examples to really drive it home. But if people listening are interested, it's like go look it up. It is a great communication framework that can be really helpful.
So, Kathy, obviously, it is impossible to try to bring in your vast experience into 30 minutes. So, I think for me, at least, the hope is that if you're listening, you're seeing that we're just scraping the top of the iceberg here in this particular topic. And so, if anybody is listening to this and they want to learn more about what you do, Kathy, how to work with you, what do you suggest would be the best way to connect with you, get a hold of you, learn about your services that you might provide?
So I post on LinkedIn every day. So my profile's under, Katy McFee. Just look at the spelling because it's a bit unique. They can contact me that way. They can also check out my website, which is insightstoactioncc.com. But if people are potentially interested in the group, I would say come to my free masterclass. It's the same masterclass, but I'm offering 2 days and times. I'm doing one April 30th and May 1st to accommodate time zones depending on where folks are located. So Europeans, there will be a time friendly zone, and people in Eastern or Pacific time, there's going to be a time zone friendly masterclass for them as well. But I basically talk about the top 3 things that hold women back from a seat at the table, how to figure out what's holding you back. So it's an interactive workshop, and what you can do next. And so there'll be some things that they can take away from that masterclass. And I'll also talk more about my group at the end of that so they can learn a little bit more about it and be like, do I want to join this? The group's really like an accelerator, really, to really help you get there. But the masterclass in and of itself, people can learn a lot about where they are today and what might be holding them back.
Katy McFee, you are amazing. Look, ladies and gentlemen, I truly hope you check out her LinkedIn. You attend a masterclass. I believe it is free, right? You said free masterclass. We will be putting a link on this on all the podcast notes. Whether you're listening to this on the podcast, look, just check underneath on the notes, as well as if you're watching this on LinkedIn Live. I'll put a link. I've already tagged Katy's LinkedIn, so definitely go ahead and connect, follow, look at her advice. But Katy, thank you so much for this
Thank
amazing.
you. This was so awesome. Thanks for having me.